My name is Professor Volker Janssen. I am, as most of you know, Professor and Vice Chair here in the Department of History at Cal State Fullerton. And I occasionally run the series Careers in History. I did about 9 of these workshops back in 2015, 2016. It feels like a long time ago because it is. Those roundtable conversations came from the conviction that a history major is a qualification for a lot of different careers and not just one for the teaching profession, even though that's very good. And so at the time, 7 years ago, I believed we needed to bring our alumni back home and back to campus and have them tell other students what they've done with their major and what kind of lives they've built. Because the history major, like many other disciplines in the humanities and social sciences, has this burden that on the one hand, we can tell our students that they can do anything with their degree, but that promise that anything is possible is so vague that it's become basically meaningless. And so we need to put some meat on the bones and make our students understand what is possible with a history degree. So back then, 7 years ago, we had panels obviously on teaching, on museums, on archives, on the entertainment industry, on careers in government, and a few others. Since then, we have built in the department a community of alumni on LinkedIn, and any of you who are listening to this now as students, once you graduate, I would like you to join our LinkedIn community of alumni. And that community has grown, and it's becoming increasingly transparent that what I said 7 years ago, that we can really do anything with a history major, turns out to be true. That amongst the 130 or so members on our LinkedIn community, there really are all sorts of careers and professions presented. And one that stuck out for me was the legal profession. And I saw that we had easily 4, in fact more, people working in law amongst our alumni. And these are the people that are here tonight. And these are the former students that we will be talking to, that I will be talking to, asking questions to give you, the current students, ideas about how you can shape your own future professional paths. So that's the idea behind this. This will basically be the layout of our roundtable tonight. It's a little bit inspired by sort of a radio format of roundtable. So the visual is not all that important. And mostly it's about a conversation around the history major as a qualification for a career and what that entails. So first the panel members will introduce themselves. Then I want them to tell us about their job and describe their path from college to their current careers, describe their work environment, and then talk more specifically about the ways in which the BA or the MA, where that applies, has prepared them for their particular careers. Then it comes to important lessons that they can dispense to you, the advice that they have to offer you, and we will leave some time for questions. This takes between 75 and 90 minutes. I'm not really watching the clock here, but that's the amount of time that I'm happy and willing to spend, and I know that our panel members have volunteered for. And I want to begin, before I turn to introductions, with a real sincere thank you to the 4 of you for coming here on Friday night at the end of what must have been an exhausting work week. And so especially for those of you who are on the East Coast, and we will find out soon who that is, to come online at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday and talk to our students. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And so I'm just absolutely thrilled that you are doing this. Thank you. And here are our panel members, and they will introduce themselves certainly on the PowerPoint presentation from left to right. So first I'm going to ask Emma to introduce herself. Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma Chase. I graduated from Fullerton with a history bachelor's in 2012. After Cal State Fullerton, I got my first job out of college in Raleigh. I was not really doing anything related to the law in my first job out of college. I did graduate with the idea that I would like to go to law school, but I was concerned about adding 3 more years of school on right after a 4-year program. And so I wanted to work and make a little money in between. So I worked for 3 years at an advertising firm where I was using my writing skills and working with small business owners and getting some good kind of business background and experience working with clients directly. And then in 2015, I started law school at UNC Chapel Hill in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And so I graduated with my law degree in 2018, passed the bar in North Carolina in 2018. And since graduation, I've been here in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm one of the East Coasters. My first job out of law school was doing general civil litigation. And now with Littler Mendelson, I practice employment law specifically.
Thank you so much. Jelaine.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So my name is Jelaine. I graduated with a BA in history in 2018, and I went straight to law school after undergrad. So I started at George Mason here in Arlington, Virginia in fall of 2018, graduated last May and passed the Virginia bar last October. And now I'm in my first year as an associate at Duncan Weinberg, practicing energy and utility law and environmental law. And it's been a good experience so far, but obviously I'm also one of the East Coasters here tonight, so.
All right, thank you for doing this, Jelaine. Alfonso.
Hello and welcome. I'm in California, very hot, sunny California right now. And so I graduated Cal State Fullerton in 2013. I got my BA in history. I always worked and went to school at the same time. And so when I graduated Cal State Fullerton, I was already working for an insurance company. And about a year about taking a break of school, I went back to school and continued to work for that same insurance company who paid for my law school at the University of Laverne. And I graduated law school in 2017, took the bar in California, passed the bar in California on my first attempt. And I've been now with a different financial company that also sells insurance as well, but I am their in-house counsel, and I advise them on labor and employment matters, as well as workers' compensation and general civil issues.
Thank you, Alfonso. And finally, Jay, with a special thanks to your wife, Katie.
Yes, ignore that. I'm on my wife's computer right now. My other one is not working. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Butine. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton with a BA in history in 2008. And shortly after that, I was a Marine Corps reservist and I was activated. I spent about 13 months on active duty, deployed to Iraq, came back during the height of the mortgage recession and hid in grad school for a couple years. Got my master's in history from Cal State Fullerton in May of 2013. And while I was doing that, I got a job at the National Archives in Riverside, where I was doing records management projects, and eventually got a job at the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division as a paralegal in San Francisco. I did that for about 3.5 years. And from there, I got a job as an investigator with the State Bar of California, where I investigate complaints against lawyers and try and investigate whether they've violated any of the ethical duties they're supposed to maintain. So I'm the single non-attorney in the group tonight.
But you are the ones who are investigating the attorneys. I think that's really interesting. Okay, so I think you can tell we have everybody working in the field of law, but quite a bit of diversity of career paths here. And I think it'll be interesting to explore a little what motivated this and how this shaped your decisions. But first, I want to hear from you, and here you have a chance to either dispel myths or hype up the job. How good is your job really? Working as a lawyer, working as in-house counsel, or an investigator, is it really as cool as it sounds to be an investigator? Does being a lawyer resemble anything that I see on Law and Order? And is the fate of your company in your hands, Alfonso? So whoever wants to go first here.
Well, I know for me, I'm 5 years from law school at this point, and And it's very different. I think if you would have asked this question, in 2020 before COVID had happened, I think my answer might be a little bit different. And I know for me, I'm all about work-life balance now. COVID has really helped me appreciate that. I want to spend as much time as I can with my family and friends, right? And so I left what would be considered a very law and order like function firm employment, where it was really just back and forth, arguing with the other side nonstop, and I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I took a more seasoned position where I advise a financial company what to do and not do. And I think that's where I really wish more shows showed that aspect of it, right? I'm not sure if you guys saw that show, Suits on USA a while back ago. That was going on right when I was in law school. And I mean, really, that's only a small aspect of the job, and there's so much more. And I think, you can be your job, your profession doesn't have to be your personality. And honestly, it's very cool because the money is very good, but also at the same time, it's not all that I do. I literally clock out at 5 o'clock. That's it. There's no more. Cell phone is down. I don't have to answer any more emails or calls, and that's really it.
That's really good to hear, because I could imagine that a lot of students believe that the career of a lawyer is always the kind of job that really sort of consumes you from the inside out, and spits you out, and you're sort of done, near a heart attack at the age of 40. And that there are other choices. And you told me earlier before we started that you have 2 children, and that this is a priority for you. And I think there's a lot of students now who also want to not just have a career define them, but also have family life. I know I feel the same way as you do about this. So it's good to know that there are, that you can make those choices.
Yeah, and I'm sure Emma, I'm not trying to call you out, but I'm sure she can comment on this as a associate at Littler Mendelsohn. They all they do is employment law, and I've had cases with them and against them, and it's very just it's not my style anymore. I don't want to deal with it, but I'm sure she has her take on it as well.
Yeah,
Emma, you want to
sure. Yeah, it sounds like I am in the same kind of industry as Alfonso, but I'm outside counsel where he's inside counsel. So that's also maybe a good thing to point out that I didn't have much an idea of before law school is the practice of law is kind of divided into transactional or litigation. And you can do both, but that's generally during law school, people kind of sort themselves out of, I would love one and hate the other kind of. So for me, I prefer litigation. It is an adversarial process, but not in a mean way. It's more just, there are 2 sides to every story and everyone deserves full, vigorous representation. And so, particularly because I only practice civil law, so I don't do anything with criminal law. Especially with civil law, when you're arguing over, who interpreted a contract correctly, it's kind of like, I can sleep easily at night because I'm not putting anyone away for the wrong reason, or vice versa. So that's one thing I didn't have much of an idea about. But so Alfonso, as an in-house counsel, he does more transactional law. He's advising the client on how they can better interact with their employees and doing kind of HR stuff. But if an employee sued his company, they would most likely hire a firm like mine to do the litigation part, because they're in-house counsel, they're full-time lawyers, but they're not doing the adversarial work where that's all I do all day. So that's a little bit different. And then in terms of something how good is your job really, or what I didn't really expect versus things I had seen on Law & Order, because I definitely have seen some Law & Order marathons in my time, especially in college, probably. But we're not, as a litigator, I'm really not actually in the courtroom that much. On TV, you think, oh, lawyers are just always at court. And I kind of wish I were in court more often, because that to me is the exciting part. But really what most of my job is researching and writing. It really is a lot like preparing for a history degree. It's a lot of legal research. It's a lot of writing briefs to prepare for litigation. I write a lot of motions. Before you get to a full trial, you have a lot of pretrial hearings, and those are based on motions that you write and argue. So I do a lot of that, which is kind of like bits and snippets that are much smaller than a full trial. So that's something I didn't expect. I thought, oh, I'm going to be a courthouse lawyer, and I'm very, very rarely in court. And then another thing I didn't expect, more on the slightly a negative, is as an associate at a law firm, a lot of my job feels like homework. It feels like I have never-ending homework. I don't clock out every day at 5 o'clock. And, you know, if I do think I have a good work-life balance relatively, particularly because I'm in Charlotte, which is not the same as working in DC or New York City, where a lot of those firms are much harsher on just completely controlling your life. Because I'm in more of like a mid-market city, people care a lot more about work-life balance. So if I had something like, you know, my sister's birthday dinner was one night, I'm clocking off at 6, that would not be a problem. But at the end of the day, if I clock out at 6, it's not like I'm really done for the day. There are always more things I could do. And so I didn't really expect it to be like, oh, I'm going to pretty much have homework unending for the rest of my career. So that's something to keep in mind, you know. But as Alfonso pointed out, you can still be a lawyer and have a different career path where you do clock out at a certain time and everything will wait until 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning. But being at a firm, it's a little more like, well, if I want to keep working till midnight, I could if I felt like it that day. So something to think about.
Jelaine or Jay, what do you want to say? How good is your job really?
So in terms of work-life balance, I mean, I worked in government positions for the last 10 years, and it is nice because generally it is a 40-hour work week, broken up by spurts of like in very intense work. Like when I was at the antitrust division, we would work 9 to 5 every day. We're working on a few different cases, preparing for witnesses to come in, just doing document review. But then we'd have a trial, and then it would be 2 to 3 months of working late nights, early mornings, preparing for trial and helping the attorneys during trial. And that was very intense, but it was also a lot of fun because the other good part about working for the government is you basically get to come to work and just try and do the right thing. And when we were prosecuting people for price fixing and bid rigging, it felt really good because we're working on behalf of American consumers to hold very rich people who are trying to take advantage of the public accountable. And that's another good part about working for the state bar is, again, it's a public agency. We're just trying to protect the public from lawyers who are misbehaving. I'd say on getting down to the nitty gritty of work, as an investigator, I spend most of my time behind a desk. I do very little work out in the field. I'm reviewing a lot of documents, writing a lot. So there's a lot of long periods of very dry, boring work, and then periods of like, oh, this is really cool, and I found a great fact that it's going to make a case, and it's really interesting. As the non-lawyer, I mean, I worked as a paralegal. I work with attorneys all the time as an investigator. The enjoyment you get out of work is dictated a lot by the quality and the types of attorneys you work with, because often when you're a paralegal or investigator, you're answering to the attorneys. So if you have a very a difficult attorney to work with, it can be hard. And I'm sure all the attorneys on the call right now are excellent and don't treat their paralegals terribly, but those attorneys do exist. So that can be a downside when you're working in sort of the support staff role.
Jelaine.
Yeah, I think my situation's probably closer to Emma's with the workload and everything. So Emma did mention the distinction between litigation and transactional work. And our firm, actually, we do both a lot for our clients because we're not in the civil space that Emma and Alfonso are in. We're in more of the regulatory administrative law space for electric utilities and environmental issues. So we primarily practice before state utility commissions and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And so our litigation would be in proceedings before those commissions. But then of course the clients have transactional and contract work that we would also work on. So it's been good to get kind of work in both of those avenues, and that experience has been great. But the workload some weeks are more stressful and harder than others, and I'll clock out later. And then others, I'll clock out at 6, which is nice, but it depends on, what is going on. If there's a filing due, then, it has to be done and you have to prepare for it. But the other thing is it's a lot of research and writing, which is what I did in undergrad and which is what we did in law school. And I think the history degree was great preparation for that, of doing the research, synthesizing, analyzing everything, organizing your thoughts and putting it together. And that's a lot of what I do. And thank God I like it. But it's been good so far.
Jelaine, can you clarify where you're located?
Yes, so my firm is in DC, and we're a small firm, about 15 attorneys, which I particularly enjoy because the camaraderie is great. Everyone knows everyone about their families. So it's nice because you get close with the people that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure for the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of conversation about the confirmation process for our new Supreme Court Justice. We're not going to get into that because that always runs the danger of being political. But I do wonder whether any of you sort of turned to law school because you had some sort of desire to deliver justice in some way. Did any of you have, I don't want to call them blue-eyed, but maybe ideals and notions of, serving justice? Was that a motivation for any of you?
I mean, it certainly was for me. I always wanted my career to have to be doing important work that has an impact, and I feel like I've been lucky enough to work in 2 positions where I've been able to do that because. I don't know, there was a story in the news a couple of years ago where the canned tuna companies were fixing the price of tuna and raising tuna prices by 10% on consumers. And I got to work on that case, and that was a phenomenal experience because, you're seeing the thing you're helping with in the news and holding these big corporations accountable. And then when there's a lawyer taking advantage of a client or clients, oftentimes it's good to see them get suspended and disbarred. And it just makes you feel good that you're sort of helping society at large. Mm-hmm. So that was definitely a motivation for me.
Yeah, I would say for me, it was definitely a motivation, at least in the beginning, right? I went to law school. An insurance company paid for mine, but once I got there, like my whole eyes and worldview kind of opened and expanded. And it was somewhat of a ruder awakening because at school I teach kind of one thing, but then getting out into the real world, it was very different. I was public defender for a little bit. I was a clerk for the courthouse as well. And, it's what little justice that you really can do. I didn't feel that was going to be my calling. And so I primarily do pro bono work with a lot of nonprofits in the city of Riverside that I work with. And I serve as a board of directors for the Riverside Legal Aid called Inland Empire Latino Court Association, called IELA. And that's where I feel like I get my justice, my fulfillment from when I was in my early days in law school, because it was not being fulfilled on the criminal side of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. I asked this because I find, and I'm saying this as an immigrant, as a German, I find the American legal system and some of the principles that underlie it one of the most fascinating aspects of American institutions. And for example, one of the things I really want to do is to be on a jury. but because I'm not yet a citizen, I don't get to. But my wife recently was called on jury duty, and of course I cannot divulge what took place there, nor was she supposed to tell me, I'm sure. But I was fascinated by this, and I am itching to one day be on a jury. I have a feeling I will never be. I think prosecutors or defense attorneys, I do not know, will not want me on the jury. But I would love to be in a jury one day. And even though there is a somewhat similar system in Germany, it's nothing like these, these 12 people who hold so much power over the process. So I find that fascinating. I'm going to go step back a little bit to actually have you guys talk a little bit about why you got into your major in the first place, and what other careers you had in mind when you were a history student, and then what made you turn to law school. So let's begin there. Did you guys have any particular or other ideas of what you were going to do with your history major at the time when you were a student back then?
I originally wanted to teach. I thought maybe teach high school history because I had really great high school history teachers at my public school in Michigan where I went to school. And I knew a lot of people didn't have that experience. I think in the public eye, history is such a boring class when you're growing up, but I did not have that experience. I thought the stories were so fascinating. I liked connecting American history to things that had happened in my own family. And I just loved it. And so I thought maybe I could be that teacher for someone else. But then as I progressed through law school, I honestly had more of a self-realization that I wanted to work with adults, and I didn't want to work with kids all day for my job, just personally. So then I pivoted to, okay, maybe I'll get a PhD and become a professor or go to law school. And those were kind of my two thoughts. And it was actually Professor Lynn Sargent. I told her I was interested in those two ideas, and she said, I don't think you would enjoy getting a PhD because you'd be stuck for many more years in the library by yourself, not talking to people at all. And that doesn't seem like your personality. And that was really good feedback. So I would advise, getting involved with the advisors and the professors in the program who know you a little bit just from being in class, who can give you honest feedback like that, because that was really helpful. And that did guide my decision. And I still remember her saying that to me today, and she's right. As a lawyer, you work with people a lot, and that's what I really wanted. That's what I wanted out of being a teacher. And so that's how I got to law school.
Anybody else?
I also thought about getting a PhD, and that's originally when I finished undergrad, and I was taking my break when I was in Iraq. I wanted to come back and go to grad school. My plan was to get my master's and PhD and teach at a university. And I think about a year and a half in, I noticed all the other students I was in my cohort wanted to get their PhDs and teach at a university. And I sort of started asking some professors, like, how hard is it to get a job as a university teacher, and learned that it is very, very difficult. And I sort of took a hard look at that and said, I don't want to spend 5 or 6 years getting a PhD, not getting a salary, and then struggle to find a job. And so I sort of quickly pivoted, and I thought about going to law school. And I had a lot of friends who were getting out of law school, and they said, Jay, really think before you go to law school. It's a huge investment. There's not a lot of lawyer jobs right now. It's the middle of the recession. Maybe do something else. And that's when I sort of pivoted to, well, I'll be a paralegal first, see if I like working in the law, and then make a decision from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, go ahead. Go ahead. Ladies first.
Sure. So to jump on the bandwagon, I had also considered teaching, and I knew that after undergrad, I wanted a postgraduate degree, considered a PhD, but then during undergrad, I did Model UN and Moot Court, and I absolutely loved them. And Moot Court really solidified going to law school for me. And for me, it was I really loved researching and writing, and you would do that obviously being a professor and getting your PhD, but with your law degree, you're applying it to help and advocate on behalf of a client. And I really enjoyed doing that in moot court and in Model UN, where you're essentially researching and writing and then advocating on behalf of your country that you're representing at your conferences. So those two experiences in undergrad solidified for me to go to law school.
Alfonso.
Yeah, and for me, I wanted to be a teacher too. I had really great and very specific history professors and teachers throughout my experience. A lot of the ones were very motivating me. I did not have a very traditional trajectory. I went from a community college. I worked the entire time that I was at community college. That I was at Cal State Fullerton, and I was at law school. And so for me, it was always, teachers can be very powerful mentors, but I mean, I just couldn't justify with a wife, a kid, and the other stuff that I had going on, really just taking on poverty and hoping that I would strike it lucky to get a good paying job to help take care of my family. And so when I went to law school, it was really out of not necessity, but because I had an insurance company paying for it, right? And so that was really the no-brainer for me. And when I got to law school, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It's definitely not like undergraduate. I mean, I'm telling you, some law students are very just, I don't know, they think it's very competitive, it's very elitist, it's very, it's almost like if they want to play like they're lawyers, they act like that in school. And it's just not, it was not a very good time, at least for me. I got into my current position because I was working in insurance claims in my undergraduate, and then that insurance company paid for me to go to law school so that I could represent them on their claims. And at this point, the only thing I wish I would have had done differently is I wish I would have traveled more, right? I mean, at my undergrad and at my law school, they offered these study abroad programs that I didn't take advantage of. And I wish I would have, because it's travel, it's credit for your classes, you network as well. And it's really, I mean, if you're on scholarship, the Pell Grants or Cal Grants or even student loans, it's kind of paid for. So I mean, there's no reason not to go to Greece or probably not Europe right now, but anywhere else that's not going involved in a war would be a good thing to do.
I'm glad you picked up on some of the questions further down. And I also appreciate you calling out some of these opportunities that we encourage all the time for current history majors. Moot court, Jelaine, you're absolutely right. And Emma, you're nodding. Did you also do moot court?
I did not. I had friends who did Model UN though, and that was something that I wished I had done. And so then actually when I was in law school, I did moot court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and study abroad, because it is true that once you get into the career, once you get into the job, spending 5 weeks overseas, it's going to be a whole lot harder to pull off. And then, let's say you get married and you have children, it's getting all the harder. So for all of you out there who are now having the possibility of doing study abroad again this summer or next year after this long hiatus with COVID, it's absolutely, it's the time to do it. You will not get another chance once you're on the job. Now, I wanted to ask Emma and Jelaine, Alfonso talked about his law school experience. How was law school for you? It sounds like a daunting commitment, because law schools are not cheap from what I hear. You can talk more about it. And I want to know how enjoyable is law school from a history major's perspective.
I can go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. Since I just graduated last May, so it's fairly recent for me. But I think it can be more enjoyable depending on your personality type. I tend to get very I have my list of priorities. School was number one. And I think I took it a little to the extreme. I wish I would have done some more, relaxed a little bit, quite frankly. But it got easier as each semester went on because I got my bearings down. I understood how to actually take a law school exam where the final exam is your whole grade. So you have no idea how you're progressing throughout the semester unless, you're going to office hours and asking questions or taking practice exams and everything. But it's a lot of reading. Preparing for a class is a whole different experience than undergrad was, where in undergrad, if you don't raise your hand, you're not really going to get called on. But in law school, there's cold calls. So you just need to come prepared every day. I was terrified my first semester, absolutely terrified to get called on, but it was one of the greatest things because learning to just talk on your feet and not just be prepared. And it's a great skill. You need it obviously as a lawyer because the judge is going to ask you any question and you need to be prepared for that. So I think law school has prepared me so far for my brief 6.5 months of practice now as a lawyer. But I think law school, it was fun. When you find a topic that you like after your first year required courses and you just pursue that, I really loved admin law. I took all those classes and I really enjoyed it. And so you'll enjoy it, but it is difficult, no lie, but it's good. It's a good experience. And I think it'll challenge you and strengthen you.
Emma.
Yeah. So Jelaine did a good job of explaining how law school is so different than undergrad. You have absolutely no graded assignments besides one 3-hour final exam per class. And so that's something that was a big shock to my system. My first year was sorting out what that meant because I thought, okay, I just have to do, in my first semester, I thought, okay, I just have to do the readings. This isn't that hard. But it's really different because, in the history course, you have the benefit of, okay, in my first assignment, I can get my feet wet, see what kind of questions the professor asks, see what the professor likes to see, and see how they grade. We don't have that in law school. You'll see some sample questions from their prior exams, and they'll tell you, here's a model answer, but it's not the same thing as understanding how they grade your work personally, and you just don't have that in law school. So academically, it's just very different, but similar to Jelaine, after the first year, it got much easier because you kind of understand what the deal is. But the first year is just a lot of kind of just figuring it out. Similar to what Alfonso said, the people that he was describing as being really intense, at least at UNC, we called them gunners, which is people who are gunning to do better than you and gunning to make the professor like them better than you, and they want to look smart and make you look dumb. I definitely had people like that in my classes. I'm not like that. I made really good friends in law school, and I navigated towards people who were not like that. So I think it's just, you're going to definitely get all types, but similarly, if you go into a law firm job, you're going to work with all types. And so I can tell you, I really like my current firm. It's really not so much here, but at my previous firm, I could rattle off 5 names of the people who had to have been gunners when they're in law school. And then I could name 10 people who were cool and nice like me in law school. So, you're going to get all types, but also just from a personal note, I actually had a great time in law school. You have to keep up with the reading, but until it's time to practice for the exams, I was able to balance a really good, healthy social life. I chose UNC not in small part because it was in a big college town. And that was something that I wanted, just to have a different experience, because I loved Fullerton. I loved being in Southern California. Downtown Fullerton's fun. I love being close to so many cool parts of California, but Fullerton's certainly not a college town. And my family was always shocked when they said, oh, my friends at Fullerton are fans of USC or UCLA sports, which is just unthinkable in a college town. And so that's something I loved about Chapel Hill, and that's just something to consider when you're looking at law schools, if you do, is what kind of area you want to be in, because there are really cool law schools that are in the middle of big cities, and if you want a big city experience, that might be your choice. But for me, I was like, oh, this is so cool. I'm going to be in a small town, Chapel Hill. Everybody here loves Carolina sports, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So it's not all just nose to book all the time.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask Jay. Now, Jay, you didn't go to law school, but you had a different preparatory experience for your job, and that was the service. Did you feel that? I'm asking this because we have quite a few students who are veterans, or who may spend a year or more in service afterwards. Did that give you any benefits that you could appreciate?
I think the biggest one was the ability to do work under pressure, because when I was at the antitrust division working on trials, there was lots of tight deadlines and high stakes, because people's freedom is at stake. Our case is at stake, and so that puts a lot of pressure on people. There's a lot of pressure you're getting from the attorneys, a lot of pressure you're getting from your teammates to do a good job, and that was none of that was new to me, because I'd done all that before in the military, and so I did pretty well, because anytime I would get stressed out, I'd be like, well, this isn't as bad as in Iraq waiting for an IED to go off. Like, no one's trying to kill me right now. This isn't that bad. And I sort of carried that with me, and that was my mantra, I would say. People are like, why aren't you so stressed right now? I'm like, well, no one's trying to kill us. It's not that bad. But in terms of like concrete, skills that I brought over from the military to the law, there's not a lot. I was an infantryman, so running around in the field with rifles and things, that you don't do that much in the law. And if I'd gone into like federal law enforcement, there'd probably be some sort of, or local law enforcement, there'd be some sort of transition over, because there's a tactical element there. But I'd say the ability to work under pressure is the one thing that really translated well.
Mm-hmm. One last question before we move on to the next slide is the diversity of possibilities in law. I mean, we see here in our panel an investigator for the state bar, and you'll get. I hope you'll tell us a little bit more about that in a minute. In-house counsel, litigation, admin law. Were you fully aware of how many kinds of different jobs attorneys and people with law degrees do? Or is this something that sort of unfolds over time? Because I could see a lot of history majors really not having an idea of what it means at all to be a lawyer, and either imagine a very unrealistic law and order scenario, or have no idea at all. Was this clear to you, or at which point do you understand how wide a field this is?
I don't know when I figured it out. Oh, sorry. But like, people file complaints at the state bar against all types of lawyers, and it's shocking to me how much different variety there is. You can do probate law, you can, which is litigating over like how to divide up an estate. You can just write wills, trusts, and estates. You can do civil litigation, you can do criminal law. I met an attorney who focused in pet law, and all they did was defend people's pets from getting euthanized if there was a dog bite. And that was her entire practice. And that was the craziest one I've seen. But there's wildly different types of law that can be practiced. There's big firms, small firms, medium firms. You can work in a big city, small city, and I think there's different cultural aspects to that. So it is shocking how much there is if you sort of look into it, like just the wide variety of types of careers you can have.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, Professor Janssen, I gotta credit you, because I don't think you remember, I did my senior paper on video games as art. And even now, there's a whole area of video game law that's opened up due to Twitch and streaming and cryptocurrency and all this other areas of law that I'm not breaking into it, but I mean, it's just so vast and wide. Anything that you can think of, right? That you would think of. This whole Activision Blizzard. I'm not sure how many guys are aware of that, and their labor and employment issues that they're having. It's just so wide and very honestly. There's nothing that if you think that your kind of law is just criminals and then big time bankruptcy. It's not. It's just anything that you like, you can find a law about it and kind of build a practice on it. And the only thing I do kind of regret is that I did not pursue video games more passionately when I got to law school, because I wrote both my senior papers in your 300A class and then 300B class on video games as art and video games as sports. And so, I mean, that's just something that I thank you for allowing me to do. And just now it has in the law field, how big it is with professional gamers and esports. It's crazy.
Yeah, I similarly wasn't really aware of how much you can do with it. And I think the options are really limitless as they're talking about. And I would say within my friends at law school, it was kind of a mixed bag of people like me who said, I think this is something I could be good at, but I don't really know what I'm going to do yet. Versus I have a friend who came in and said, I'm going to practice water law. And he practices water law in Sacramento now. I still don't really know what that means, but he knew the whole time his specific niche area, and that's what he does. So I think if you think you know what you want to do, that's great. And if you have no idea, that's great too, because like for me, I do employment law, and that's kind of like the legal version of HR stuff. And I just love it because I love the way people interact with one another and the way that people interact with rules and discrimination issues. That's really interesting to me. But I had no clue that I was going to do that when I went to law school, and really more got exposed to it because there are clinics offered at the law schools, there are job fairs, career fairs where it's just kind of networking, not interviewing, but where alums would come and say, this is what I do, and give you ideas. And then also in the summers in between law school, you're expected to intern full time. And that's when you really get the most exposure to different types.
Are those internships paid? And then Jelaine, I'm going to let you.
Mine were, yeah, they can be paid. Typically, I think if you're doing something that's like pro bono-esque, like working with a civil rights group, maybe it might not be paid, but the university would give you a stipend to do it. Okay. But if you're at something like a regular law firm, the law firm pays you, yeah.
And Jelaine, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I echo everything that they said. I had no idea all the different possibilities, but a quick plug-in for me, the Career Center at my law school was really helpful in meeting with us and getting to know us, what our backgrounds were, what our interests were, and giving us ideas. Have you looked at this internship or this class maybe would interest you, and kind of giving you ideas about things that you obviously had no knowledge of, and that helped you kind of find an avenue you may want to pursue for your career and for internships.
Thank you. So in your work environment, do you have a lot of colleagues that also have history degrees, or is this something unusual? Does this stand out? Is this something that makes people sort of misunderstand what you know? What are your experiences as someone with a history degree in your field?
In my experience, people I work with now and people I went to law school with, I found history and poli-sci to be the most common majors for lawyers or for law students. But I would point out there are no prerequisites for law school, which is really cool. So I also have friends who have biology undergraduate degrees, which is really cool, and it makes the diversity of thought really neat. But yeah, history is a really common major for lawyers.
Yeah, and I would say I've had the same experience. A lot of political science is the lawyers I've worked with are government or international relations. They studied in undergrad. If I did anything differently in undergrad, I minored in international relations or something because I thought it sounded cool and it would be fun to study. I would minor in something wildly different than history and a soft science, like a biology, accounting, economics, because I think it can really, having a different sort of knowledge base or skill set can really complement your history, especially in law, because I know my wife works with lawyers, and they all they do is sort of life sciences stuff. So a lot of the lawyers have degrees in biology because it really helps them understand the science behind that goes along with the law. So having sort of another sort of knowledge base would be really helpful if you have time to pick a new minor or something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If any of you guys have the desire to do patent law, you have to have a science degree. So biology, chemistry, engineering, micro. And for some of you who are wondering, those are the lawyers who make the most money. Just if you look at the research, they make hands over fist way more than I make, and I make very good money. But you have to have that kind of degree. But other than that, like Emma said, everyone that I work with now has either a poli-sci or a history degree. And I think primarily because, you know, lawyers deal with primary sources a lot, right? Direct evidence, right? All that secondary sources would be what's called in our word hearsay, right? We don't use it. I don't care what Professor Janssen said about Thomas Jefferson's yearbook, right? What did Thomas Jefferson write down? That's the primary source that we want to get to. And I think that's kind of the cool thing about history, that I kind of trained you to think like that. You don't want to know what someone else says. You want to know what you think, or how you're interpreting that information. And I think that was very unique and from other fields from my point of view.
Mm-hmm. That gets us to the other question. What kind of skills do you regularly employ on the job that you developed in your major? And it sounds like there's quite a bit of it, right? You'd already alluded to the research and the writing. Can you be more specific there? Where do you feel like, man, this is pretty much exactly what you would do?
I mean,
if you were
I spent a lot of time writing. Like, and it's either if I'm working, I'm either reading or writing. Occasionally, interviewing witnesses, but the first thing I'm doing after I interview witnesses is writing a report about what the witness told me. But I'd say other than that is the ability to think critically and think analytically about what is the evidence I have in front of me, what does it say, what is missing from this, if there's conflicting stories, why are they conflicting, is someone lying to me, is this document fake, where can I go to get other information that can either corroborate or refute the other evidence that I have in front of me, and really get to the bottom of like what actually happened in the situation. And I think when you're like working through the very difficult sort of when you're doing all these big research projects, it helps you learn to think and deal with like all these different facts and things like that. So I'd say critical and analytical thinking is the big one for me.
And I'll plug in the writing skills are really important. I mean, and obviously you write a lot of papers when you're an undergrad in your history classes, but the ability to have your thesis, your main point, and to actually organize your thoughts in a good structural manner, and so that the reader can follow from point to point and see where you're going, and that you do all the work for the reader so that it is as easy as possible for the reader to follow your argument, understand your supporting points and everything. And I remember in my 490T class, I had Dr. Brunel, and she repeated over and over again, your paper, you are a lawyer, you have your thesis, this is your argument, you need to gather all your evidence and support it and everything. And all of those skills that I worked on in undergrad are fully applicable to my job today.
In 300A and in the graduate theory class 501, we often struggle with the concept of objectivity. To what extent is there one possible truth in history that we can finally all settle on, where there's no more dispute? And pretty much any colleague I know, along with me, works and often struggles to convey to students that the notion of objectivity is an elusive one. that while there is no such thing as alternative truths, there are certainly many different sides to a story that are not always easily reconcilable, even if you work with a full commitment to the proper treatment of evidence, which the alternative truth concept I think doesn't really quite follow. Do you, in your experience as a lawyer in litigation, come across the same concept that there's not one objective truth that you can arrive at, but that there are rivaling notions of truth that you may not be able to reconcile?
Absolutely. And that's something I think I was first exposed to in history that has really played out a lot as a lawyer, is, like you were saying, two sides to every story. And as a lawyer, what's really important is you need to fully, as a litigator especially, you have to fully understand your client's position. And even in civil litigation, clients aren't always forthcoming about telling you the full truth or their full experience right when you first interview them, and you have to keep talking to them and saying, okay, well, I heard what you said, and then I talked to the other attorney and they said this, can you explain the difference here? And you do have to dig deeper, but at the same time, you have to be able to understand the opposite side too. Because, for example, if I'm writing a brief, I am advocating my client's side, but I also have to explain why the other side is wrong. And so in order to explain why the other side is wrong, I have to understand what their strongest points are. And so that was something that I did find really helpful in history, was that concept of there are competing sides, and you can't, I think like an unsophisticated way of thinking about something is I'll pick my favorite and ignore the other side. But really a more sophisticated way of analyzing it that you have to do as a lawyer is, what are the pros and cons of both sides, and how can I navigate with both of those? But you have to understand the strengths of the side that you don't believe or don't advocate for, just as well as the side you are advocating for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's something that occurred to me when Jelaine, when you mentioned Professor Brunel saying you are a lawyer, you have to make the case in your history paper, right? Really, I hesitate when I say this, because I feel that an historian ought to be a judge, because they really need to fully take into account all countervailing evidence, and as a litigation lawyer, you may want to know what the other side may bring against you, but you're certainly not going to say it, right? So you will be quiet about things that they may bring up and then be prepared to counter. But so in the adversarial process, you try to know the other side, but deliver yours, right?
Well, so I would edit that slightly to say, I wouldn't, if I understood the other side's strongest argument, I wouldn't be quiet and wait for them to bring it up. I would proactively bring it up. It's just in the way that you phrase it. So rather than saying, on one hand, this is great, on the other hand, that's great, you would say, on one hand, my guy is great. And it's also important to know, this is why the other guy is not that great. And so you take their strongest argument and you do present it, but you have to phrase it in an opposite way to show why you have to undermine it, basically. So I would bring it up on my own, but I would undermine it every time I bring it up.
I mean, I deal with this issue a lot with my job, because all the time it's a client or someone filing a complaint saying, my lawyer did or not do this thing, like they didn't show up to court, they stole my money, they did something really bad. And 99% of the time, the lawyer's writing back to me and saying, no, that didn't happen, or it didn't happen the way this person said it happened. Sometimes it's like, yeah, it did happen, but it's not a violation of any rules, so you should just go away. But usually it's like, it didn't happen or it didn't happen that way. And you sort of have to sort of figure out a way to reconcile, like, well, who's telling the truth here? Because a lot of times the client clearly has an objective. Sometimes they say they just want to be vindicated. Oftentimes they're using the complaint to try and leverage a refund out of their attorney to get money, and that's a powerful incentive for them to lie or embellish. The same way an attorney can lie and embellish because they have a powerful incentive to like not get suspended or disbarred. And sometimes complainants are just out because they've gotten, it's become personal and they just want revenge, and they will say whatever they can to get a lawyer in trouble. And you have to sort of weigh these different goals each person has and look for objective evidence and facts. And I mean, I use documents all the time because the best part about documents is that the document doesn't lie. It is what it is. It might have false information on it, but like, it's not going to change its story. It's right there. And you have to just figure out ways to get to the truth, but often there's competing narratives.
The four of you, have you always had a penchant for arguing? Did you always enjoy a debate and argument? Because not everybody does, I learned.
I say no. And honestly, I don't, in 5 years of license, I don't really do a lot of arguing. I mean, one time, one attorney complained to the judge that I would not talk to him. Like, I mean, kind of like Jay says, it is, your facts are your facts, right? I'm not going to argue with the other side if we're not going to be open to reason. And I think a lot of times I try to reason with my opponents because, I mean, if you're a good attorney, you really shouldn't be in court. I mean, sometimes you have to, like, court is really not the glamorous approach TV makes it out to. Court is your last resort where you have to let some judge or 11 other people decide the outcome of whatever your issue is. You don't want some 11 random strangers. I mean, Professor Janssen, you mentioned in the beginning that you're dying to get on a jury. I would never let you on my jury if I knew this was your raison d'etre, your life's journey to get on a jury. No, I don't want you to decide my $1 million case. No, God, no.
Don't say that when you get interviewed for a jury.
I know.
Don't tell them you want to be on it.
Yes.
I want to resolve my issues that I have, especially on my client's behalf, because my client's going to be happier that they don't got to spend money on a trial, because it costs money. And so, I mean, for me, I always like to reason with people. I think that's what history and law kind of have in mind. Take your evidence, your primary source, and reason with it to come at your conclusion, and you back it up with facts. And the times that I was not able to reason with my opposing side, I always walked away 5 years going, knock on wood, as the winner with my defense verdict. So, I mean, Emma, Janae like to argue?
Yes.
I do like to argue, but and maybe other students can relate to this, but I personally find it a lot easier to advocate for someone else than to advocate for myself. So even if you're someone who feels like, I don't like to speak up, I don't like to stir the pot, you might find it easier when you don't feel like, oh, I'm arguing this to make myself look good. You're like, no, I know my client really well and I want them to have good representation. So I enjoy that aspect of it. So yeah, I do enjoy the arguing, but it's more in that I'm defending or in some other way representing my client.
Yes, I also like arguing, and I 100% agree with Emma's statement about it is a lot easier to do it on behalf of someone else than yourself, because I feel like maybe there's that when it's on behalf of someone else, you're not personally being judged for the position you're taking because it's the position on behalf of the client. That's just my 2 cents on that. But yes, I do enjoy the arguing. Or we should call it advocacy.
Okay.
That's another way of putting it.
That's good. All right. So at this point, we have heard so much about the overlap between what historians do and what you guys do that this may feel a little unnecessary because I in the program, we are committed to specific goals, right? So we have our BA goals and our MA goals, and I usually ask in these roundtables, which of these goals do you think you really are applying on the job, and which of these really sort of, which of these did you really accomplish in your BA? I wonder whether historical knowledge has ever become useful for you at any point, or whether the actual familiarity with the historical narrative is typically not really what's asked for. I mean, history as a body of content of knowledge, is that ever something that sort of serves you well on the job?
I mean, I wrote my thesis on the Dutch resistance during World War II, and I have not used that body of knowledge at a single time during my career. I suppose if I went into like the civil service to work for the State Department and I got a post in the Netherlands, I suppose like that body of knowledge might be useful, but in history field, no. I'm sure that there are some areas of history if you went into law, or like if I had studied the history of I don't know, organized crime, and I went and got a job for a law enforcement agency, I'm sure that would be very useful to me. But
do any of the others have classes, historical knowledge? I know, Jelaine, we took was it the 1950s?
Yeah, we did the 50s and the Reconstruction era.
Yes. So for the Reconstruction era, does the context of three constitutional amendments ever come in handy, or is this not really?
In my day-to-day job, no, but the historical knowledge that I gained from like that class and then my other classes throughout undergrad, they were really helpful for understanding the development of the law in my con law classes and my admin law classes, and understanding why something may have developed at a certain period of time, say in the Depression era and everything. But I think that was where it came in to help the most during those classes.
Okay. Is there anything that you want to say about these goals where you want to say, yeah, this is really, this is the one that I use each and every day? I believe 2 and 3 in the BA are probably things that you apply on a daily basis, and the same is probably true for the MA goals as well. So I don't want to belabor that too much, because I feel that we as a group have come to understand how much law and history actually do have in common. And this is pretty much the question I just asked you there. My last question for you then maybe is the advice and recommendations that you can give history majors and MA graduates for the job search if they are interested in law. What are the things that majors and graduate students should be doing now if they want to work in the legal field, either as attorneys or in other jobs like that of the investigator that Jay is doing?
You know, right now it's so hard because I know we're just coming out of a pandemic, and when I went into law school, the economy was just starting to recover and there was a moderate amount of work. But now, at least in California, it just feels like there's so many jobs available. They're dying to get attorneys, and I just think if anything, I would recommend that you guys do what you guys enjoy, right? Because you're going to be putting so much time into this. And so my only recommendation would be to find something that you enjoy. I think Emma had a very good point where she talked to the career advisor and told that, a PhD is probably not going to be for you in the long haul. And I think that's going to be critical because, unless you're going to have someone financially backing you to go to, graduate school to be law or a master's program, you're going to be investing quite a bit of time. And I think the pandemic has all kind of made us realize how much time is critical, how much of it we really don't have.
I would echo that. It is a much better job market right now than when I graduated law school just a few years ago because of the pandemic, for sure. So I was fortunate to have a firm offer. I I didn't have it right at graduation. I was still interviewing that summer, and I felt like all my peers already had their jobs lined up. I was still interviewing the summer after graduation, but you take the bar exam in July and you don't find out you passed till the fall. So I still started working in September when everyone else did, but it just felt very scary and competitive to get jobs. But now it is a lot easier. But with that said, something I didn't realize as an undergrad is law school rankings honestly matter a lot more than rankings of any other professional school that I have heard of. Certainly, depending on the kind of law you want to do, that might not be true. But if you want to go into like working for a big law firm, like what I do, it really matters that you get good grades and that you went to a good law school. And the way you get into a good law school is you get good grades in undergrad, and then you study hard and do well on the LSAT. And the LSAT, just as a brief overview for your knowledge, it's completely an aptitude test. It's not memorizing the law or anything like that. It's just an aptitude test. You still need to study for it though, because it has things that you wouldn't expect, like math problems. It's a lot of like logic type questions. But if you are really considering a career in the law, I would recommend doing as well as you can in undergrad, really preparing for the LSAT seriously, and then applying to a lot of different law schools and really going to the best one that you can afford and that makes sense for you. Because, personally, UNC is in like the top 30. I'm not in the top 10 or anything, but I'm not, unranked. So I'm kind of I went to a decent school, I would say. And that definitely helped me being in the Charlotte market. But if I had been like, I definitely want to work in New York City, or I definitely want to work in DC, I would have felt a lot more pressure to get into one of the top 10, top 15 schools. So that's just something, it's not a warm and fuzzy advice, but it's like, I'm the first lawyer in my family, so no one told me that. So I was kind of navigating this all on my own. And I paid for undergrad and law school. I'm still paying for undergrad and law school by myself. But because I did well at Fullerton, I got a really good scholarship that covered most of my law school tuition. So that's something else to consider, of course, when you're choosing your school.
Other advice?
I would say I was thinking about going to law school, and I took a job first to figure out if that's something I wanted to do. And all the colleagues I worked with who were paralegals at the Justice Department, they were in the same boat. They were trying to decide if they wanted to go to law school or not. Many of them did go to law school and are lawyers at firms and having great careers as lawyers. Some of us said, like, this is not for us. We want to do something else. And I think there's nothing wrong with taking a couple years, earning some money, and figuring out if it's something you really want to do. Because as the lawyers here will tell you, law school is a big financial and time commitment. And if you're not sure, there's nothing wrong with taking some time to think about it first.
Mm-hmm. Jelaine?
Yeah, I'll reiterate what I said earlier about taking advantage of the Career Center, which I did not at Fullerton, but I know my law school Career Center was super helpful, and taking advantage of meeting with your professors to learn about different opportunities that you may not know about. But for those of you who are maybe, not looking to go to law school right after undergrad, I would seriously look into the Cal State DC program. I did that in undergrad, and there we talked about travel earlier too. So you come out here for the summer or the spring semester, get an internship, and it's a great way to, the travel, the internship experience, networking. And I know that the people that run that program, they're really focused on career development, getting those professional skills and helping get you connected in case, you want to work out here, or there's other connections too. But that was a great program. So I just wanted to plug that in.
Thank you. Yes. And I know that some in the audience are applying for DC Scholars and will go with DC Scholars in the summer. Here's a question, and this is something that comes up with law school inevitably, and I don't want to pry into anyone's personal financial background. Alfonso was straightforward, said, look, I had to figure out a way to pay for it, and it was a no-brainer to have that opportunity. And I think I don't know whether Alfonso's experience with his firm offering to pay for his school is something fairly common or highly unusual. But am I right to assume, along with the rest of the people in the audience, that going to law school means that you commit yourself to student loans that will hang over your head for 5, 10, 15, 20 years? I don't know how long that will be. Is that something you just have to accept as?
I would say yes. It is very unusual for a job to pay for law school. That's an awesome setup. I think, like an MBA degree is a lot more likely to have a job paying for your degree. Law school is more, you're investing in your future, but, similar to any other professional degree, really. I mean, yeah, you're committing to it. And for anyone who's in a full-time program, some law schools do offer part-time school too. So you could do something like work full-time and go to school at night. But for full-time programs, the American Bar Association says that in your first year of law school, you're not supposed to work at all, even part-time. And so I always worked part-time during undergrad. And so that was something that was difficult for me in my first year. I ended up working part-time my second and third years, but my university wouldn't give me any jobs. Like I worked in the law school library later in law school, but my first year, they wouldn't even allow you to interview as a 1L because they're like, no, you just need to figure out law school for now. So it is a big financial undertaking. For me, it will take 10 years from the point of graduation. So I have a handful left. But, I think a big point though is the job market's really good right now for lawyers. And so if you graduate and you have a job lined up, it's okay. I mean, I can afford my student loans. I'm fine. If I didn't have a job right now, it would be scary. But, if you have a good job security, then for me, it was just kind of the same consideration as going to undergrad because I knew it was going to be something.
I actually agree a lot with Emma. I want to clarify, it was through their master's program, and so they paid for up to like $15,000 a year for law school, which is still, great. But I had to sign a contract that I would work for them for a certain amount of time. But I mean, even then, it definitely is a very big commitment. But I still have student loans, and I'm not paying them. So I don't care what Joe Biden says. He can keep extending it. I'm not going to pay him. So that's the attitude that I have taken. And, I think I have some, confidence just because I was trained to be a lawyer. And so, honestly, Professor Janssen can probably speak to this, but when you're an attorney, you kind of know your rights, right? A lot of the things that happen to a lot of people that are very common, that are not right, they're not going to happen to you because you're going to know, what cops can do, what cops can't do, what companies can't do. Honestly, when I was a renter and I was in my third year of law school, I had to sue my landlord and she gave me all my money back. And, and it was because of my law school training, that I was able to get, to do certain things like that, right? Everyone else was like, oh, so well, there goes my deposit, and so that's not something that is common. So you're going to get a very good tool out of this. So don't think going to law school is not like getting a master's, there's a law license that makes you a very powerful person, and that's why we have state bar investigators.
Yes. Jelaine, you were going to say something too.
Yeah, probably. Well, it will not actually, just probably like Emma. I also took out loans, but my law school gave me a pretty good scholarship to cover a lot of my tuition. So it was actually covering more of my living expenses than in this expensive DC area than just my full tuition. So I do have student loans, but if you're wise and responsible about it, it should be okay. I'm hoping to knock them out definitely within 5 years, but I think it's doable.
Well, thank you all. This has been great. I found it really useful. I kind of want to be a lawyer now, but maybe my best shots are still the jury, and I promise to be hush about it. I will not bring a book or in other ways reveal any sort of details about me that make me get kicked off. Now come questions from anyone here in the audience. So we've covered a lot of ground, but there may still be details you wanna know from any of our panel members. So please. Yes, Timothy.
Yeah, I wanted to first of all thank you all for making the time to do this tonight. This is a much more encouraging, I guess, bit of feedback than the Reddit law school, forum tends to be.
Low bar, but thanks.
Yeah, so you touched upon, like, most of you were able to get your first jobs fairly quickly out of law school. When you're getting your first job, in your experience, I guess, both observing your peers and in your own, how much, I guess, flexibility do you have in your first job in choosing the kind of law you want to practice? Or is that something that comes a little bit when you have more experience?
I think you still have a say in it because you only would interview with places that practice the kind of law you're interested in. And I think that law firms do a good job of trying to sort people out. And if you just, in the interview, they're going to say, well, why are you interested in our practice areas? And if you don't have a good answer, they're probably not going to give you an offer. So I think it kind of mutually sorts itself out. But with that said, even when you're graduating, you might not know the practice area you want to go into. And in my first job, I did some employment law, but I was doing more broad, like contract law in general. And that's how I, over the first 3 years, towards the end of my 3 years at my first firm, I was like, the one I like is the employment law thing. And that's how I pivoted. So I think, I don't think you're going to get stuck doing something you absolutely hate. I think that's pretty unlikely. But if you take a few years and you try something out and you don't love it, I also don't think you're pigeonholed if that's what you're afraid of.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Robbie, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So how did you guys go through the process of actually choosing your law schools? Because I feel like it's a little bit different than like a regular academic discipline in which you kind of like go for, like for Cal State Fullerton, it's so good to go for the history major because they have such a great department for it. But I feel like with law, I want to get into either intellectual property and music. So it's kind of nuanced. I know that, but I don't really know what school I would actually want to go to for that.
That's a great question. Thank you. How do you find a school to make sure that they do well what you really want to do?
I think exactly. I mentioned on it earlier. I think it's good to look at the rankings of law school. The higher the rank, typically the better the school. But also, if you know what you kind of already want to go into and do, then what you might want to look into is seeing if you can get it in with a particular firm that does that already, and then go to a school that the firm will accept, and then work backwards, right? Kind of reverse engineer it that way. I mean, for me, I chose my school because of a scholarship, and my job was going to pay for it, right? I didn't care. I was going to go to law school to do one thing. It sounds like you're gonna have that experience as well. So you might want to listen to the firms that practice that kind of law, that do music. It sounds like your entertainment law kind of is what you want to kind of go ahead and do. And a sports agent or a music agent is actually just a lawyer. They're just called agents. So if you want to look up with some agents in North Hollywood or Beverly Hills area, that would be a good resource for you to work backwards. But I know Southwestern Law School in LA has a good program.
Yeah, I'm thinking geography for the kind of law you're talking about might be important. So like a school in the LA area, or potentially New York or Nashville, like places where music is big, would be good. Washington, D.C. does a lot of the IP litigation for the whole country. So if you're more focused on IP, DC might be a city you're interested, but if you're really focused on the music part, LA obviously. And then another thing would be check out the professor bios of law schools you're considering and see if any of them have research focuses or practice focuses in the area you're talking about. Because if they do, then that's probably going to be a good connection, but B, they're probably going to teach classes, or even you can also do independent studies in law school. So they might actually offer you an independent study in the specific area you're interested in.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks, Robbie.
One more, check to clinics. I know my law school had a really big intellectual property law clinic, so that would be a way to see if a school has a focus on that for you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I meant to ask Jay about the work of a paralegal. Can you get a job as a paralegal just with a history BA?
This is an answer I hear a lot from in the law. It depends. So if you want to work as a paralegal in California, you generally need a paralegal certificate, is my understanding. So if you want to work for a state agency or a law firm, you need to get your paralegal certificate first. However, because I worked for the federal government, they do not fall into that requirement. So I was able to get a paralegal position with the Department of Justice. And if anyone is interested in working as a paralegal or taking a job before law school to try it out, if you go on USA Jobs and look for paralegal positions with the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division, they have a specific program where they post 2 to 4 year positions where you work there for 2 years, maybe 4 if they want to extend you. And pretty much all the people who take those jobs are thinking about going to law school. Many of them do, a lot don't. You get to do a lot of really boring stuff like make binders. You get to do a lot of interesting stuff like read emails of executives and help attorneys in witness interviews and attorney proffers and really get to know like what's going on. And a lot of times the attorneys there say, you're doing the work of what a junior associate would be doing in a law firm. We just want a paralegal to do it. And all your paralegal colleagues are really eager to like learn there. So that specific job at that specific agency is a really good one to check out if you're thinking about going to law school. But yeah, if you want to work as a paralegal in California, more likely than not, you're going to need a certificate, which takes like a year, maybe 2 to get.
I'll just add that that's state specific. So in North Carolina, they offer paralegal certifications, but it's kind of a bonus. A lot of paralegals I've worked with just have bachelor's degrees. And I think that getting experience as a paralegal is much more practical experience than going to law school, honestly, of what lawyers do. Because when you're a paralegal, you really see what lawyers do. And when you're in law school, you read a lot of law cases, and it is different.
Timothy just sent a chat message saying that UCLA and Cal State LA have 6-month paralegal programs. So for those of you who are looking for paralegal jobs that actually require that certificate, but usajobs.gov, what Jay pointed out, is indeed a good place. And as Emma said, it's state dependent. All right. Okay, it seems that there are no other questions then. So I think we played the time pretty nicely, just about 90 minutes. I want to thank you, Emma, Jelaine, Jay, and Alfonso for being here tonight, for taking the time. I love this. It always makes me excited, makes me think that I could start a new job. And I'm hoping that a lot of people will watch this later on and learn from this. So thank you for being here. Have a good night. And I hope I will see you. Our paths will cross on some other time in the future. Take care. Bye, y'all.